He had a future. He had a dream. But on one cold night in London, single knife took everything away. Asterisk, London, a city of lights, dreams, and noise. But beneath the glow, there are streets that never sleep. Streets that take more than they give. In 2011, on one of those cold March nights, a young boy named Godwin Lawson was walking home with friends. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was just 17, a rising footballer with a smile full of hope and a future waiting to unfold. But in the blink of an eye, that future vanished. Flash of metal, a scream, and silence. What followed would break a family, shock a city, and expose the dark truth about London's knife crime epidemic. This isn't just another story of violence. It's the story of a dream destroyed by a single moment. This is the tragic, true story of Godwin Lawson, the boy who believed he could outrun the streets. In the quiet hum of North London, where city life blurs into narrow streets and modest homes, a boy named Godwin Lawson was growing up with a dream bigger than his surroundings. He wasn't born into privilege or fame. His life began like many others in the heart of Tottenham, a neighborhood that has seen both triumph and struggle. But what set Godwin apart was not where he came from, but where he was determined to go. From a young age, Godwin had a spark that drew people toward him. Those who knew him described him as bright, gentle, always smiling, the kind of boy who could make a room lighter just by walking into it. Football wasn't just his hobby, it was his heartbeat. On damp mornings when others stayed home, Godwin would be outside, dribbling a worn-out ball on cracked pavement, pretending the noise of traffic was the roar of a stadium crowd. His family, his mother, Yvonne, his father, and his siblings, watched him grow with pride and hope. For them, football represented more than sport. It was a path, a way to rise above the shadows of their community. Tottenham had its share of challenges: poverty, unemployment, and the ever-present threat of street violence. But Godwin's home was a sanctuary of faith and focus. His mother believed in education and discipline, while his father believed in the strength of dreams. Together, they gave Godwin what every child needs: belief. As he grew older, his passion deepened into purpose. He joined local youth clubs, trained relentlessly, and soon began catching the attention of coaches. His movement on the field was fluid, natural, almost poetic. He had speed, control, and something more, an intelligence that couldn't be taught. Godwin wasn't just playing the game, he was reading it, understanding it, seeing plays before they happened. At 16, his dedication started to pay off. He was selected for football academies, opportunities that hinted at a brighter future. For a young man from North London, this was a chance to escape the invisible limits set by postcode and circumstance. Godwin knew that every training session, every drop of sweat, was a step closer to the life he wanted. But what made him truly special wasn't just talent, it was character. He never boasted, never looked down on anyone. Friends remember him as humble, grounded, and full of laughter. Even when the streets whispered trouble, when some of his peers were pulled toward gangs or quick money, Godwin kept his distance. He had seen too many young lives lost to knives, to anger, two moments that couldn't be undone. In his mind, there was no room for that world. He had football, and football was his way out. By the time he reached college, his path seemed clear. He earned a scholarship to play in Oxford, a rare and proud moment for his family. It wasn't just a move for education, it was a symbolic victory against the statistics that so often defined young men from his background. Moving away from London gave Godwin a glimpse of peace, cleaner air, quiet streets, a different rhythm of life. He began to imagine a future where he could make something of himself, maybe even come back to his neighborhood one day to inspire others. But dreams, no matter how strong, often exist beside forces that don't care about them. Back in London, knife crime was rising again. Reports of stabbings filled the evening news, teenagers fighting teenagers. Moments of rage that left entire families destroyed. For many young men, survival had become a daily choice. The wrong look, the wrong street, or being in the wrong place could change everything. Godwin's parents worried, as all parents do, They knew how unpredictable the city could be. But Godwin was careful. He didn't seek trouble, and trouble rarely found him. He was focused, driven, and surrounded by good people. Yet fate doesn't always strike where it's expected. In March 2011, Godwin returned to London during a short break from college. It was supposed to be a simple visit, time to see family, catch up with friends, share laughter, and maybe kick a ball or two in the park. No one could have imagined that those few days would become the last chapter of his young life. As the sun set on that cold evening, Godwin left home with the same easy confidence he'd always carried. He wasn't heading to trouble, he was just going out like any other young man would. The city lights flickered against the damp roads, and somewhere in the distance, sirens echoed background noise in a city too used to chaos. To the world, it was just another night in London. To Godwin Lawson, it was the beginning of the end of a dream. He didn't know that somewhere nearby, anger was brewing. That choices made by strangers, choices born of pride, fear, and violence would soon collide with his life in a way that no one could stop. And so, as that night deepened, the stage was quietly being set for tragedy. A mother would soon lose her son, a dream would be cut short, and a name Godwin Lawson would become a symbol of everything that's lost when violence takes over reason. For now, though, he was still alive, laughing, hopeful. Unaware of the darkness that was waiting just around the corner, the night began like any other in North. London quiet in some places, restless in others. Streetlights shimmered across. Wet pavements after a passing rain, and the hum of buses rolled through the dark like a tired heartbeat of the city. For most people, it was just another Saturday night in late March, but for Godwin Lawson, it would be the last night of his life. He had come home for a short break from Oxford, where he was studying and training. He missed his family, his old friends, and the familiar rhythm of his neighborhood. Being away had reminded him of everything he wanted to achieve and everything he wanted to protect. That evening, Godwin decided to meet some friends in Stamford Hill, not far from where he grew up. The area was familiar, busy, noisy, but alive with energy. For young Londoners, nights like these were often a way to unwind, to reconnect, to breathe after long weeks of study or work. He left home around 11 p.m., wearing his usual easy smile, a jacket to guard against the chill, and the kind of calm that came from a clear conscience. His parents had no reason to worry. Godwin wasn't the kind to get caught in trouble, wasn't a part of any gang, he didn't carry weapons, and he never sought conflict. But the streets don't always follow rules. Sometimes fate picks its victims without reason. As the night deepened, the city's tone shifted. The laughter outside bars began to fade, replaced by the scattered tension that so often lingers in the air of late-night London. Groups gathered on corners, eyes scanning each other with silent suspicion. Some carried grudges, others knives. And somewhere between those quiet tensions, 3 young men, including Godwin, crossed paths with the wrong crowd. No one knows exactly how it began. Some said it started with words. Others said it was nothing at all. A misunderstanding. A moment too quick to stop. But what's certain is this. Godwin was not the target. He was there, but he wasn't the reason. When violence erupts, it doesn't ask for reasons. In a flash, chaos replaced calm. Shouts cut through the night. Feet pounded against concrete. The sound of struggle filled the air, followed by the unmistakable metallic whisper, the sound of a blade being drawn. The next few seconds would decide a lifetime. In that brief storm of confusion, Godwin was stabbed once in the chest. The knife pierced through the very heart that had carried his dreams. He tried to step back, his body trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. Eyes shot through him like fire, and the strength that once drove him on football fields now struggled just to hold him upright. He fell to the ground. The streetlights above flickered, catching the faint reflection of blood spreading on the wet pavement. The sound of footsteps faded as his attackers ran, leaving behind only silence and the distant wail of sirens that came too late. It was over in seconds, but those few seconds would echo through countless lives. Passersby rushed to help. Someone called emergency services. Friend knelt beside him trying to keep him conscious, whispering his name, begging him to hold on. The boy who once ran faster than anyone on the field now lay still. gasping for breath, his eyes searching for something beyond the noise. Perhaps for home, perhaps for peace. Paramedics arrived quickly. They worked under the cold glow of streetlights, doing everything they could. The ambulance doors closed, and the city carried on as if nothing had happened. But inside that ambulance, life and death were fighting a silent war. By the time they reached the hospital, that battle was lost. At 2:10 a.m., Godwin Lawson was pronounced dead. He was only 17 years old. News of the stabbing reached his family before dawn. Phone call short, panicked, impossible to believe. His mother's world shattered in an instant. The sound of her own heartbeat drowned everything around her. Her son, her pride, her dream, gone in a senseless act that made no sense at all. The news spread fast. 17-year-old student stabbed to death in Stamford Hill. Promising footballer killed in knife attack. To the media, it was another headline in a long line of tragedies. But to those who knew him, it was the end of a light that once brightened their world. The next morning, police tape fluttered in the wind. A small crowd gathered behind the barriers, whispering, wondering, mourning. Flowers began to appear on the pavement where he fell, first one bouquet, then another, until the ground was covered with color. Notes written in shaking handwriting said things like, "Rest easy, bro, and you didn't deserve this." London had lost another young soul, another reminder that the city's streets could steal futures without warning. For days, investigators worked to piece together what happened. Witnesses gave statements, cameras were checked, suspects were questioned. But justice in knife crimes is rarely simple. The chaos of the night left little clarity. Many of those responsible slipped back into the shadows, their faces hidden by fear and silence. But justice was never the point for those who loved him. What mattered was what was lost: a future, a dream. A son, as news stations played his smiling photos, the country saw the face of a young man who had everything to live for. The image was heartbreaking. A footballer, a scholar, a son killed in the very streets he had once hoped to rise above. And while London moved on, his family could not. His mother, Yvonne, sat in his empty room for hours, staring at his football boots, still neatly by the bed. His training bag was untouched, his notebooks half open, as if he might walk in at any moment to pick up where he left off. But that moment would never come. Outside, the city kept breathing, buses rolled by. Children went to school, and headlines shifted to news stories. Yet in one quiet home, time stood still. The night that changed everything had left a permanent silence behind. For Godwin's parents, grief wasn't just pain, it was confusion. How could someone so good, so careful, so far from the world of violence, fall victim to it? How could a single knife erase 17 years of love, laughter, and promise? There were no answers. Only memories and the endless ache of what could have been. That night didn't just take a life. It stole a family's future. It left a void in the hearts of friends who once laughed with him. Teachers who saw his potential, coaches who believed he could make it. It reminded everyone that, in a world so full of opportunity, there still existed corners where dreams could die in seconds. In the days that followed, the media moved on to other stories. But for those left behind, the pain only grew. Sometimes late at night, people walking past Stamford Hill still pause where it happened. They see the faint traces of old candle wax, the remnants of rain-washed tributes. And for a moment, they remember the boy who dreamed of something better, the boy who never got to see how far his talent could take him. The streets of North London have seen many tragedies, but some leave deeper scars than others. Godwin's story was one of them. His name became part of a list of victims whose lives ended far too soon, whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But even in tragedy, some stories refuse to fade. In quiet corners, people still speak his name with warmth. They remember his smile, his kindness, his love for football. They remember a young man who wanted nothing more than to live, to succeed, to make his family proud. And they remember that one night, the night that changed everything, when all those dreams vanished into the cold. London air, morning arrived slowly. as if the sun itself hesitated to rise over a city that had taken yet another young life. North London felt quieter that day, not because the traffic had stopped or the people had changed, but because something invisible hung in the air, the weight of loss. News of Godwin Lawson's death spread quickly, first through whispered phone calls, then through the radio, then the television. Each broadcast repeated the same words. A 17-year-old student, promising footballer, fatally stabbed in Stamford Hill. Another victim. Another statistic. Another tragedy in a city growing too familiar with grief. But for his family, it wasn't a headline. It was the end of everything that mattered. Inside their home, time no longer moved forward. The walls that once echoed with laughter now absorbed only silence. His mother, Yvonne, sat motionless in his room, surrounded by pieces of his life, his football jersey hanging on the door, his sneakers by the bed, his photograph smiling from the desk. Each object became a wound that refused to heal. There is a kind of silence that follows. It's tragedy, a silence heavy enough to crush even the strongest hearts. That silence filled the Lawson home. Neighbors came, bringing food and condolences. Friends stopped by, unsure what to say. They offered hugs, whispered prayers, but nothing could fill the emptiness that had taken root in grief. Even words lose their meaning. Yvonne replayed that night over and over in her mind. What if he hadn't gone out? What if he'd come home early? What if someone had stopped it before it began? Each what if was another cut, deeper than the last. The police visited, kind but procedural. They explained the investigation, took statements, asked questions that felt impossible to answer. Did he know anyone who would want to harm him? No. Was he involved in any gangs? Absolutely not. Was he carrying anything that night? Only hope dates passed, but the world outside kept spinning. Buses ran their routes. Schools reopened. The weather shifted. But for those who loved Godwin, everything had stopped on that night. At the site of his death, a makeshift memorial began to grow. It started with a few flowers, white lilies, red roses, and a small football placed gently by the curb. Then came candles, handwritten notes, and photographs. People came quietly, some from the neighborhood. Some who had never met him, but were moved by his story. By the third day, the pavement was covered with tributes. A sea of color and pain, it became a place of reflection, a small patch of ground that told the story of a city's broken heart. Children left cards drawn in crayon with words like, "We miss you," "Godwin, and you're a star in heaven now." Adults stood in silence, tears mixing with rain. For Yvonne, visiting that spot was both unbearable and necessary. She would kneel beside the candles, touch the cold ground, and whisper her son's name. Sometimes she stayed for hours, unmoving, as if waiting for an answer that would never come. The local press began covering his story in more depth. They wrote about the promising footballer whose life was cut short, about the rise of knife crime in London, about the families left behind. Television crews arrived asking for interviews. Yvonne, her voice trembling, spoke not as a mother seeking attention, but as a woman broken by something she couldn't understand. "He was a good boy," she said softly. "He didn't deserve this. None of them do." Her words echoed across screens and social media. For a brief moment, the city paused. People began to talk about youth violence, about lost futures, about how easily life can vanish in a single second. But as with all tragedies, attention fades. Within weeks, new stories replaced his on the front page. Another stabbing, another mother's tears, another echo in the same endless cycle. Yet for those closest to Godwin, the grief remained raw. His friends couldn't process it. They still messaged his phone, still tagged him in photos, still half expected to see him walk through the school gates. His absence felt unnatural, like a missing heartbeat in a familiar rhythm. Teachers spoke about him in hushed tones, remembering the student who was always early to class, respectful and full of energy. One of his coaches, holding back tears, said he had something rare talent with humility. That's hard to find. The loss rippled outward. It wasn't just one life gone. It was the future he would have built, the people he would have inspired, the moments that would now never happen, For the Lawson family, grief turned into ritual. Every morning began with silence, every night ended with prayer. His mother would light a candle in his memory, a small flame fighting against the darkness that had settled around their lives. Friends and relatives tried to comfort her, but grief isn't something that can be fixed, it can only be carried. Some days she managed to smile, remembering his laughter. Other days, she couldn't leave her bed. The police investigation continued, but progress was slow. Knife crimes are chaotic, often random, fleeting, hard to trace. Witnesses disappear. Fear silences truth. For months, questions hung unanswered. The family waited not just for justice, but for closure. But closure never truly comes for a parent who loses a child. At the memorial service, hundreds attended. The church overflowed with people, students, teachers, teammates, neighbors, and strangers who had followed his story. Outside, the street was lined with candles that burned long into the evening. As the service began, choir sang softly, voices trembling with emotion. Photographs of Godwin flashed across a screen, a young boy smiling on a football field, a teenager laughing with friends, a son standing proudly in his graduation uniform. Each image was a reminder of everything that had been taken away. When Yvonne spoke, the room fell silent. She didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like a mother whose love had been tested beyond measure. He was light, she said, and the world is darker without him. Her words broke something inside everyone who heard them. People wept openly, not just for Godwin, but for every young life lost before its time. After the service, the coffin was carried out into the gray London afternoon. The sky seemed to hold its breath. As the hearse moved slowly down the street, the sound of quiet sobs filled the air. Footballs were placed beside the flowers, and for a brief moment, it felt as if the entire community stood together, united in sorrow, united in love. But grief, like all storms, eventually fades into quieter pain. Weeks turned into months. The visits from journalists stopped. The calls from police grew less frequent. Life demanded to move forward, even when the heart refused. Still, reminders remained everywhere. The football field where he used to train stood empty some evenings. His old teammates sometimes played wearing shirts with his name, printed across the back. Lawson, 17. Every goal scored felt like a small tribute to him at home. Yvonne kept his room untouched. The air still smelled faintly of his cologne. His notebooks remained open on the desk, his handwriting frozen in time. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, she would sit there and talk to him, not out loud, but in her heart, hoping he could somehow hear her. People say time heals, but time doesn't heal. It only teaches you how to live with the wound. For Yvonne, that wound was permanent. Every sound of laughter reminded her of his voice. Every news report about another stabbing tore the wound open again. London, meanwhile, kept counting its losses. The number of knife-related deaths continued to rise, names piling up like ghosts in the city's memory. Godwin became one of many, but to those who knew him, he would never be just another name. He was proof of how fragile life can be, how quickly hope can turn to horror, how even the best among us can be lost to a single moment of violence. The echo of his absence reached far beyond his home. Schools began holding assemblies about violence. Coaches spoke to their teams about choices and consequences. His story became a quiet warning, a reminder that no one is truly safe when anger rules the streets. For some, that echo sparked reflection. For others, it sparked fear. But for Yvonne, it sparked something deeper, an unspoken resolve. She didn't know it yet, but the pain she carried would one day become her purpose. Because even in silence, echoes don't fade, they find new ways to be heard. The day of the funeral arrived beneath a gray sky, one of those London mornings where the clouds hang low and heavy, as if the world itself feels the weight of loss. The streets of Tottenham were quieter than usual. Shops opened late. People spoke softly. Even the air carried a strange stillness. In a small church at the corner of the neighborhood, mourners gathered, each carrying their own version of grief. Family, friends, teammates, teachers, they came dressed in black, clutching flowers and tissues, trying to prepare for a moment that no one is ever truly ready for. At the front of the church stood the coffin, simple, white, and surrounded by photographs. On one side, a football rested gently, placed there by his teammates. On the other, a framed picture of Godwin smiling, eyes full of life. It frozen forever at 17. Candles flickered along the aisle, their light trembling in the cool air. The organ played softly in the background, a melody of sadness and memory. One by one, people filled the pews until there was no space left. The church overflowed with faces, some familiar, others strangers who had only heard his story but felt compelled to come. Outside, more people stood in the rain, listening through open doors, united in shared sorrow. When the service began, silence fell over the room. The priest spoke first about life, about faith, about the cruelty of time. His words were gentle, but each one carried the sharp edge of truth that sometimes goodness is not enough to be spared from tragedy. Then came those who knew him best. A childhood friend stepped forward, voice shaking, remembering how they used to race home from school, laughing until they couldn't breathe. A teacher followed, recalling how Godwin always stayed behind after class to help others, how he never once gave up, not on himself, not on anyone. And then finally, his mother stood. There was a pause, a long, painful silence before she began to speak. Her voice was soft but steady. Her eyes glistening with tears, she refused to wipe away. "My son was more than just a boy from North London," she said quietly. "He was a light in our lives, bright, kind, and full of dreams. He loved football, he loved his family, and he believed in goodness. That's who he was, and that's how I will always remember him." Her words filled the room with something deeper than sadness, a quiet awe. Because even in her heartbreak, there was dignity, strength, and love that no violence could destroy. When she finished, there was no applause, no movement. Only the sound of people weeping softly in the pews. The service continued with hymns and prayers. Each note of music felt like a whisper to heaven, each verse a plea for peace. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping gently against the church windows like the rhythm of unspoken tears. Then, it was time to leave. As the coffin was carried out, the congregation followed in silence. The procession moved slowly through the streets, led by pallbearers who struggled to hold their emotions as much as the weight of the casket. Behind them walked his family, his parents, siblings, relatives, each step heavier than the last. Along the route, people lined the sidewalks. Some bowed their heads. Others clutched flowers or photos. It was as if the entire neighborhood had come to say goodbye. When they reached the cemetery, the clouds finally broke. A thin ray of sunlight slipped through, touching the white coffin as it was lowered into the earth. The sound of soil hitting wood echoed softly, dull, final, irreversible, and then silence again. The kind of silence that doesn't fade. The kind that becomes part of you. Yvonne stood by the grave long after the others had left. Her umbrella lay forgotten beside her, rain soaking through her clothes. But she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where her son now rested, surrounded by flowers, prayers, and memories. No mother should ever have to bury her child. But that morning, she did. People came and went, offering hugs, murmuring condolences. Yet she remained still, one hand on the gravestone, the other holding a small photo of Godwin as a little boy, smiling in his school uniform. Hours passed before she finally whispered, "Sleep well, my son. You did nothing wrong." Those words hung in the air, soft but powerful, a message not just to him, but to the world. In the weeks that followed, life tried to move forward again. But for Yvonne, the world had lost its color. Every day began with a moment of disbelief that he was truly gone. Every night ended with prayers whispered into the quiet. People said she was strong, but strength is often misunderstood. Strength isn't about not crying. It's about surviving when you'd rather not. Her house became a museum of memory. Godwin's boots remained where he left them. His photos filled every wall. His laughter still echoed faintly in her mind. replaying in the spaces between waking and sleep. Some nights, she'd hear the distant sounds of boys playing football in the park, and for a fleeting moment, she'd imagine him there, running, shouting, alive. But then the truth would return, sharp and cold. The city around her carried on. News of stabbings continued. Each headline reopened the wound. Each mother's cry reminded her of her own. London had become a city haunted by its own sons. For every Godwin, there were others, names whispered, forgotten, buried too soon. Yet somehow his story continued to be told. Teachers used his name in assemblies. Youth coaches spoke about him when they warned their players about choices, about safety, about life. Even strangers online shared his photo, writing messages like, "Rest in peace, young king." His death had become more than a personal tragedy. It had become a symbol of wasted potential, of the cost of violence, of a society still struggling to protect its children, but symbols cannot hug, cannot speak, cannot return what was lost. For his mother, he was not a headline. He was her son, the boy who laughed, who dreamed, promised he'd make her proud. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, she visits his grave with fresh flowers and his favorite jersey. She cleans the stone, traces his name with trembling fingers, and talks to him as if he's listening. Maybe he is. Maybe, somewhere beyond this world, he hears every word. "You were love," she whispers. "You still are." Those visits never get easier, but they have become her ritual, her way of keeping him alive in the only way she can. Time moved on, but grief doesn't follow time. It bends it. It stretches it. It traps you in the moments that broke you. In her eyes, Godwin is still 17, still laughing, still chasing a ball under the floodlights, still dreaming of tomorrow. The world sees him as a victim. She sees him as her child. The final goodbye was never really final, because love doesn't end. It lingers, echoing softly through the spaces left behind. And so, even now, when the night falls over North London and the rain begins to whisper on the rooftops, somewhere in that quiet, the story of Godwin Lawson is still being told. A story not just of death, but of life bright, brief, and unforgettable. The dreamer who never woke. The boy who believed in better. The sun whose light still flickers in the darkness. Godwin Lawson -1993 to 2011. Gone too soon. Never forgotten.